40 below zero outside. But he doesn't have far to drive, so he grabs his scraper and quickly scrapes a little window enough to see what's right in front of him, jumps in the car. Before you know it, he's pulling into the driveway, reaches up, hits the button for the garage door. Nothing. So he does it again. I mean, it's late. His wife's asleep. He doesn't want to wake her up. He hits it again. Nothing. So what's he do? He just keeps hitting the button. He doesn't have a key for the front door. He just keeps hitting the button. Nothing's happening, and he eventually looks out the side window and sees 2 doors away. A garage door, opening and closing, opening and closing. He was at the wrong door. What was the problem? His window was too small to see the big thing. His house was different. The door looked the same, but the house was different. So, the problem, view too small to see the big thing. That's exactly what Matthew 24 is all about. In a nutshell, all the signs of Christ's return are world scale, big things that we will miss if our view is too small to see. There's many wars, many hearts, many Christs, many in famine. All large-scale problems. The one small-scale problem is the most important, the biggest in a way. A view, a potential for a view too small to see the big things. In Matthew 24, verse 33, we read it. If your Bible, your smartphone is still tuned to it, Jesus says, when you see all these things, referring to the big things just mentioned earlier in 24, recognize that he is near, right at the door. Rightly seeing the big picture gets us to the right door at the right time. Watch therefore, verse 42, for you do not know what hour your Lord is coming. We all know that. You don't know what hour he's coming. In verse 43 he says, but know this. Know this. You don't know what hour, but know this, that if the good man knew in what hour, in what watch, it says, what watch the thief would come, he would have watched and would not have had his house broken into. Night watches at that time were divided into 3 hours each. So if you are on guard during the right 3-hour watch, you were ready for the hour that the thief came, right? Simple logic. So, likewise, he says, when you see these big things happening, get ready for Jesus to be at the door. Watch. He says, watch over and over again. Why so often? Well, as a way to dial us in on why he might do that, think of it this way. How many people around the world are going to be celebrating the resurrection of Christ Easter morning? Millions? Billions even? Easily, John says, billions potential. There's at least 1 billion Catholics. And they're big on sunrise services, and now in the Protestant world, big. But not just us, there's Eastern Orthodox and others. That morning they choose. Now we know that baptism celebrates the death, burial, resurrection of Christ. And it didn't happen on Easter Sunday morning back then. We know it was a Sunday morning. But consider this. We don't know how many look forward to that Sunday morning, Easter morning resurrection, but we do know how many people were at the resurrection itself when it happened. How many were there? Zero. Right. Right again, John. 0 were there at that time. Why only 0? Why only 0? Didn't he tell the people about it? Matthew 16:21. Jesus showed his disciples he'd be raised the 3rd day. 17:23. The 3rd day he shall be raised. He's speaking of himself. The 3rd day he shall rise again. There's 3 times right there, but there were no disciples at the resurrection. Even his enemies knew to be on guard the 3rd day. Just jot this down, Matthew 28:6. Actually, 27:64. The enemies send guards to the tomb, it says, to the 3rd day, so that the disciples don't come and steal the body away and say he was resurrected. Even his enemies knew the 3rd day he had said he is going to be resurrected. You'd think the biggest crowd in Israel's history would be standing outside the door of the tomb, right? With all that, 0. The only people there were the guards. But they weren't watching for Jesus to be resurrected. They were watching for disciples to steal his body and say that he was. And then when he is, there's no people there. But when somebody finally does come, there's an angel that says, he is not here, for he is risen just like he said. Kind of a little dig there maybe, huh? Just like he said. That's Matthew 28:6. So it's awesome that today, millions, even 1 billion, are celebrating the resurrection of Christ. My thought is that while it is great, awesome, that we caught on to the resurrection, but there will be no second chances for the return. You ever think about that? As awesome it is and much we want to celebrate that resurrection, Jesus repeats himself even more often, saying, be ready for his return. When you see these things, be ready. At least 9 times that I count, he alludes to be ready. When you see these things coming, watch. That's why he repeats those things so many times. When you see these things, watch. What things? Now, you've heard lots of sermons and evangelistic things over the years, I'm sure. When you see what things? I know it's a little challenging for Adventists who've been in the church for years, even some Christians that hear this message in their own churches. We hear the same thing over and over again, but tune in. Don't lose your attention right now. When you see, because we're going to show that we are seeing them today. Now, of course, we all hear about the wars and the rumors of wars. Every evangelism meeting I attend emphasizes that one, right? Right? Am I the only one that seems to notice it, that we focus on it, and then toward the end, I've said it again, and it's true, that they increase with frequency and intensity up to that time. True. But do you know in Scripture, in Matthew 24, it says these are the beginning. Wars and rumors of wars are the beginning in verse 6. We've had world wars. That's been happening. So don't be focused on that primarily. What comes after that, Jesus says. What will go on? What other big things will we see? Persecution of Christians, for one. Have you heard the radio, been listening to Christian radio, others lately, where you hear about stories like the Atlanta fire chief? He writes a book. It's on his own time. He's a Christian. He writes a book, and in it he includes a small section of the biblical take on marriage. He gets fired because on his private time he's not allowed to express those views that are contrary to those of the leadership of their city council. That's just one of many stories that's going on now. It's cool to be whatever, just not a biblical Christian. Persecution of Christians. That is a sign in the last time, and not the only one. There are many more. Another persecution, university professor forbidden to speak about Christianity with others outside of his job. That's in this country. In his own time. You can't work for this university, this public university, if you speak of private religion, Christian religion, outside. So that's one mentioned by Jesus. Another, how about killing Christians? Speaks of when you see this big thing. Well, this number isn't so huge when you consider world population, but did you know that every month, the statistic I read, 322 Christians around the world killed for their belief. That's not in this country, thankfully, right now, but do you see these signs happening? Yes, we see these signs happening. And the enemy would love us to just fall asleep and not notice these signs in relation to what Jesus says about them. Killing Christians is one of them for their beliefs. Here's another one. This is probably the one I want to zero in on. Hearts failing for fear of what's coming on the earth. Hearts failing for fear of what's coming on the earth. What are people afraid of today on a world scale, big scale? What do you think is one of the most common things people are afraid of today, of what's coming on the earth? How about economic collapse? Have you heard that? You heard that one? You aware of that one? You might not know this, but in our conference right now, we just finished the first quarter. Tithe is down by 6%, which if it keeps going throughout the year, that's about 6 pastors' salaries that will have to be eliminated in this conference alone. And you find out that this is the same division-wide. That means across North America, this trend is the same. What's going on economically? 6%. That's 6 pastors just in this conference, Kansas, Nebraska. That would be gone if we continue. And that's just a rough estimate on my head. I just found out that going on just last night. But you can go to the most popular business books section in Barnes & Noble right now and see at least 20% of the books defending or attacking our capitalist economic system right now. Didn't see that just a few years back. I looked, 20% of them. I have a witness, Craig, Linda. They walked in. No, not Craig, Alex and Linda walk in. Hey, look at this. Yeah, well, in fact, I took a couple of pictures to show you. This is what's on the shelves. Capitalism in America, written by Greenspan. The future of capitalism in question. 400-year history of American capitalism. The age of surveillance capitalism. And the subprint is a little iffy, but it's questioning the future of capitalism in our country. Why? Because our economy is shaky and people are scared. What is coming? We don't know. So there's a rise of talk about socialism, thinking that that's a good idea, not knowing that throughout history, socialism has never been successful. Story after story. Read Solzhenitsyn's Gulag Arpeggio, which shows clearly living under that kind of a system. It's not stable in a healthy way. The golden passport is I didn't have time to read the whole thing, but thankfully A friend bought it, and I was able to just skim enough to see the title, The Golden Passport, Harvard Business School, The Limits of Capitalism and the Moral Failure of the Masters in Business Administration Elite. Those world leaders come through Harvard Business School, and it chronicles the school's impact on American capitalism by releasing a generation of big business leaders from considering, get this, considering anything but their own wants. That's how we end up with a system that allows for CEOs of hospitals or any other businesses to make mega millions of dollars while the nurses work 12-hour shifts. Everybody knows after 8 hours they're about shot, and you're going to go in there and have some serious thing done to you, and the nurse is half comatose. Don't go to the hospital too close to their 12-hour shift change, unless it's on the good side. So, seriously, we got a system where the CEO can make $30 million and the person working the 12-hour shifts after going to college and even their master's degree is exhausted for much less money, considering nothing but their own narrow wants. The elite business school trained them to think that way. And by the time the 80s were finished, the majority of MBA degrees looked to them as leaders and adopted that mentality. Lacking any pretense to higher ideals. The economic collapse is closely tied to a moral collapse. Which brings us to Matthew 24:12. The last one, second to last one, lawlessness increases, the love of many waxes cold. That's agape, that's other-centered, consideration of others in your decisions. How will this impact? How will this affect them? The love of many waxes cold as lawlessness endorses and encourages self-centered living, self-centered life. The price of inequality, how today's divided society endangers our future. Refers to the centralization of wealth to a limited few. Some of the most gross violations of capitalist management, I would say, foretold in Scripture. I don't know, anybody see Ray Dalio a couple weeks ago on 60 Minutes? I'd like to watch that show now and if I find something. Ray Dalio, self-made billionaire who predicted, one of the very few who predicted the 2008 economic collapse, financial crisis, believes himself that the wealth gap is a national emergency. He sees the concentration of wealth among the few as a threat to democracy, he says, that could split the country. So what does he do? No, brother. He pledges to give away half of his billions to charity. You know who else does? I got you that time, John. I did. Because see, we're shifting now. We're moving to the other side where those who are destroying the company through the country, the world through capitalism, he is one who's trying to shore it up because he's afraid it will lead to not just economic but world collapse. He's not writing as a Christian, or he's not being interviewed as a Christian. He's being interviewed as somebody who's got a lot of money and admits, hey, this is wrong. We got to do something about it. And he's not alone. You know who else is doing that? Mark Zuckerberg, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. Some of the scores of billionaires that are giving half their wealth to charities. Do you know why? They're trying to stem the collapse of civilization through the collapse of the economy, of capitalism, because they know socialism isn't better. They've been educated. They know what's going on. course, they don't want to lose the billions that they keep. But this is an example of people who are trying to shore up a disintegrating country and world. But they buck systematic corruption. They are struggling. Those on the other side who are supporting socialism include Chris Hedges. Anybody know that name? He's got an interesting title to his book, America, The Farewell Tour. Just one of the scores of books being written now, folks. We got to be awake to see what's going on and observed by those who are in key positions. He's not just some fly-by-night socialist author. He is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist. He is adept out of Harvard University, of all places, so he's tuned into what the corruption is in the MBA leadership, and he ferrets out such things as, looking it up, the centralization of wealth, the opioid crisis, mass shootings, rising rates of suicide, gambling, pornography. But he says the most ominous danger we face comes through the courts, colleges, cultural organizations, and press that once ensured civil discourse was rooted in reality and fact. Talk about a world-size shift. Once rooted in reality and fact. No longer so. Remember, he's a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, digging up facts, well-referenced. Systematic disinterest in reality among the leaders of our country and world. And what is the response of the citizens to this systematic disinterest in reality among our leaders? He says, as he says, the tangible signs of our demise may be obvious, but this only accelerates our retreat into delusional thinking. What's our response to their letting go of what reality is and fact? We let go of reality and fact. Why? It seems like a dangerous thing to do. Why do we do that? As Daniel Boorstin said, Americans increasingly live in a world where fantasy is more real than reality. Able to make our own illusions so vivid, so persuasive, so realistic that we can live in them. So what they're saying is that as we see the corruption in our world government and leaders and feel powerless, we are more prone to withdraw into our own little worlds and ignore all that. We want to escape. As we see lawlessness abound and love grows cold, we are tempted to withdraw into our own little worlds. Just scrape away a little window so we just see what's right in front of us. We go to work, we go home, and we play. Go to work, go home, go play. That's what Hedges calls the Disneyfication of America. The Disneyfication of America. I was at Disneyland recently. And I don't want my country to be like that. No offense to those who like Disneyland, but I was shocked when a parade of Disney's characters came through the big crowd, and it was packed. Parade of Disney characters comes through. There's Donald and Goofy and all these characters I saw as a cartoon when I was a kid. And as they came through, there was this gasp that rose from the crowd of adults. And I was shocked. I was like, what? I mean, there's lots of kids there, but there was at least as many adults, if not more. And I was just shocked. I didn't know what to make of it. I was like, really? Took me a little while to figure out that this was their escape from the pressures of the world. Their escape from the pressures of the world. They drop their guard and want to be absorbed into the magic kingdom. Now, we all need to escape the pressures of the world. But those theme parks make $7 million a day off that illusion. I was surrounded by a marketing empire designed for me to lose touch with reality and my wallet. And I was not having that. That's a scary place to drop your guard. Don't drop your guard in Disney Town. I did for a second, just for a second, and I grabbed a bottle of water, just this size, isn't the same bottle, but just this size. Out of the cooler, my kids are saying, I'm thirsty. Kathy's in line to get something, so I grab it and I hand it to her in line and say, get this. I didn't know what price, it didn't mark the price. Afterwards, she comes back and says, that water was $5.50. They got me. Can't believe it. We need to escape the pressures of this world. But don't drop your guard in places that are designed to market their illusion and profit from you. I'm not saying that going to Disneyland is a sin, or Disney World. We all need a place where we can escape the pressures of the big bad world and drop our guards. But be careful where we drop them. The Bible declares that in the last days men will be absorbed in worldly pursuits, in pleasure and money getting. They will be blind to eternal realities. Ellen White said it's impossible to have the affections and interest engrossed in worldly cares, increasing earthly possessions, and yet be waiting and watching for Christ's return. Daniel Kahneman wins the Nobel Prize 100 years after she wrote that. The Nobel Prize in economics for saying the very same thing. You can't focus on two things at the same time. The tangible signs of our demise may be obvious, but this only accelerates our retreat into the delusional thinking. The challenge is to be balanced. We can't concentrate all the time. God doesn't want us to. I heard some of Ron Carlson's sermon from last week. This builds on that just a little bit. We've got to be able to come away and rest in a while, but we have to be careful what we do. The question is, what we do for our breaks, does it strengthen us to be ready to meet Jesus at the door? Or does it make it harder for us to have our devotional time, reading His Word, seeing what's going on around us in the right context? What are we doing during those times of rest? Does it strengthen us or does it weaken us? There's more. I want to just say Luke 21:34. Constantly be on your guard so that your hearts will not be loaded down with self-indulgence, drunkenness, and the worries of this life, or that day will take you by surprise. So we are on guard. We're in the enemy's territory, but we're not so intensely focused that we're off balance and the pendulum swings the other way so completely. Every precaution must be used to prevent spiritual declension, lest the day of the Lord overtake us as a thief. One more big world-sized thing Jesus mentions in Matthew 24. You know what it is? This gospel must be preached, will be preached to all the world. Big picture, all the world, then the end shall come. Right up to the end, Christians are not selfishly absorbed in our pursuit of our own pleasures of the world, stocking up on guns and ammo for the end to happen, but reaching out to others. That not only we, but others would be ready when Jesus opens that door. The Health Expo that we're going to have next week is one way, one step toward doing that. Again, if you're interested, come after our meal around 1 o'clock, 1:10, and you can learn more about what we plan on doing. So we see the signs fast fulfilling. As the love of many waxes cold, let's not get so focused on our own little worlds that we don't see the big things that tell us to watch. For Jesus is at the door. There's no chance, no second chance for the second coming. But we do need breaks from the pressures of the world without sacrificing the principles of his word. He whose resurrection millions, if not billions, will rise tomorrow morning to celebrate that same Jesus that gave so much for you and I is going to come back. I want to be at the right door at the right time. What about you? Let's not be fanatics. Let's not go and tell people they can't do this or they can do that for their recreation, because we don't know what load they're under. We don't, my favorite thing is something that doesn't cost anything, to go for a walk on a beach. Not too many beaches around here, so I got to compensate. But let's give each other some room for recovery, but keep in our own minds what works for us, that we grow closer to the Lord, more ready for his return. I must apologize for our opening song. I believe that most of you knew it. The words were good, weren't they? You able to read those while nobody was singing? Thankfully, John knew that one. The closing one, I believe you will know better. So, let us rise together and sing one that I believe the majority of you will know. Please join me in standing.